So I'm an artist here in Detroit, and I'm a mother of two. And my journey here, I mean, I've always been an artist since I was a child. I think sometimes it's just something that you do and you never question and you never imagine another life path for yourself. And that's how it went. So I had a supportive upbringing in terms of developing myself in art and design, and I went on to do my undergraduate and master's degree both in sculpture. So I was primarily working, three-dimensional and, being in school in academia, a lot of it was focused on, being intellectual and learning art history and learning to put words with your art that would make sense to other people, which is totally valid and wonderful, but you can really get in your head about it to the point where like you're disembodied a little bit from your making. The work that I'm making now really came about earlier on in motherhood. So I have always, throughout, all of my art making, been really interested in the domestic sphere and using materials that reference the domestic sphere. But after I had the kids, I just really, there was a disconnect between who I was as an artist and then stepping into this new role as a mother. And for a while, I just was at an impasse and I didn't really make much and I was frustrated. And all of those ideas about, you know, being conceptual with my artwork just felt really difficult for me. So I just felt like I needed to do something with my hands. I didn't have a studio at that point, I was just in the home. And I got out some of my old supplies. And I had developed a collection of vintage wallpapers. I had a collection of like old doilies and textiles and things like that. But I got out the wallpapers and I just started like cutting them up and rearranging them just to like do something with my hands and have my body and my mind and my hands be in coordination with each other. And it felt so good. And I just kind of went with it because it was really helping me bridge these two parts of my life, kind of sew together who I was before becoming a mother and who, I am now. So I started just making these small pieces on my dining room table. Then as my kids grew and I, got more freedom, I was able to, move out of the home and have a studio outside of the home. So the pieces just kept getting bigger and bigger. A lot of them I sourced first from my grandmother's house when she passed away. Like she lived in a home that had like a different like patterned floral wallpaper in every room. I mean, they were really personal to me, and like being able to kind of think about my past, think about my upbringing, and use these materials in a way to kind of just unearth ideas about, domesticity as I saw it, and motherhood as I saw it, and, labor as I saw it. Um, so when I started working with these materials in a more like purely aesthetic embodied way, they took on a different life, really. They became, a material that I could use that was like a source of beauty and texture and color and pattern, um, that I could more or less respond to. And they do still have that, those deeper meanings to me, but they're more than that now. I think that first of all, as just as a physical material, that it has already has a color, a texture, a pattern in which I can respond, So I'm working on responding to the colors and creating like gradients, or I'm working on responding to a pattern and juxtaposing patterns next to each other. Um, so the feeling of working with things that are very different. Like sometimes I work with these, beautiful, florals from the 80s and 90s that maybe look a little bit beautiful, a little bit tacky. Um, and I will cut them and then splice them together with like a very bold stripe, like a red and blue stripe, that they seem so visually disparate, but then finding a way for them to coexist next to each other is really fun for me. It's one of those things that, you kind of follow the materials and let the materials kind of guide you. Also, the material itself being wallpaper, I am making things that go on a wall. So I find joy in like recontextualizing the wallpaper and making them, I guess, what you would consider to be, more fine art, um, rather than just decoration. I really enjoy working with things that are a little bit larger than I am. Like, I just find it so satisfying to create something that is larger than I am, that might have like a bigger aura. Also, like, I have been inspired by some of those mid-century, like, minimalist artists, like in my art history upbringing, that's who we were looking at and who's
Right.
exciting. Um, but yeah, I haven't always identified with that sensibility necessarily. So being able to like contrast those hard, kind of larger, a little bit more defined shapes with the more chaotic nature of like juxtaposing the wallpapers, it just allows me to kind of bridge these two and come up with a form that is unique and only a byproduct of what these wallpapers and what this form could produce. I know that sounds funny, but it's kind of like it's not sacred geometry, but it kind of reminds me of sacred geometry in the sense that there is one solution. It, in a sense, it kind of loops back to that idea of being like very meditative for myself. They kind of usually just kind of come to me. Whatever I'm
Okay.
inspired by in terms of sketching geometric shapes, um, I just kind of go with, it's like feels like an intuitive process. That's a lot of
Okay.
fun. Just to
Mhm.
create something just weird, I just something that's going to stop you and, and make you ask
Ah,
questions or make you stop and force you to look, yeah, it's not a square. What is it?
right.
A lot of them come from the desire to create um, some kind of illusional dimensionality. For example, the one that is right there in the background, right? So this piece is derived from drawing in 2-point linear perspective, right? So I have the vertical line and then the lines, the orthogonal lines that come from the top and the bottom, would move to an imaginary point on either side. So that I have a couple pieces where I'm playing with that idea of like linear perspective or, created illusionary perspectives. I feel like I am a little bit in dialogue with like those minimalist artists, but then also with I don't know, I think about Agnes Martin a lot, and her pieces couldn't be more
Oh,
different from mine in terms of their aesthetics, but in terms of like
right.
the meditative quality of them
Hmm.
and she was trying to I don't know if she was trying to, but it was like a reflection of her, inner life. And and I think that this is in a sense like a reflection of an inner life, and it's a way like I hope that art can be something that can be useful to people, in terms of finding a place to land and finding a place to feel comfort, and finding a place to kind of rest and meditate on. Um, and I don't know that care was such a huge part of those like more mid-century artists, caring for the spirit or soul. But I don't know. I feel like also the wallpaper lends itself to feeling a little bit more nurturing and a little
Yes.
warmer. But also at the same time, I love the idea that I'm taking from many decades and kind of compressing it, So I don't know, it's working with collage that way in terms of taking from many different, you know, from the 1940s through like the 2000s. I work with wallpaper from those eras. So it's interesting, like just to think about the 20th century in terms of those domestic patterns.